As the George W. Bush presidential administration rapidly comes to an end, it's a good time to look back and see what we learned from public opinion, stretching from January 2001 all the way to the present, that is, the 8 years of the Bush administration. 5 points I can make after this type of review. Point 1, despite the fact that Bush is leaving office with a very low job approval rating of around 30%, if we look at his entire administration, we find that his average will actually be higher than 4 other presidents. Looks like now, pending final job approval ratings taken by Gallup before Bush leaves, his average over 8 years will be in the 49% range. That puts Bush ahead of Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Harry Truman in terms of comparing overall term averages. So Bush, although he's leaving very low, as I mentioned, certainly is not the lowest rated president in terms of public opinion that we have measured here at Gallup. Point 2, when we ask Americans to look back at the Bush administration and rate which things got better as opposed to getting worse during Bush's term in office, we find 4 things that net out on the positive side of the ledger, at least by a little. Those would be terrorism, race relations, national military strength and defense, and the fight against AIDS. Point 3, there are 2 things in particular that Americans think certainly got worse, much worse during the Bush administration compared to when he started from where he ended, and those would be America's position and image in the eyes of the world and the economy. Point 4, when George W. Bush began his term, Americans did not think that there was one major problem that was facing the United States. When we said, what's the most important problem facing the country, the answers were all over the place. The economy, morality, education, crime, government corruption, and so forth. That changed immediately after the terrorist bombings of 9/11 when terrorism jumped up, changed again in 2003 when Iraq became the top problem. And Iraq essentially, with some ups and downs, remained the top problem facing the country in the eyes of Americans up until this year when it faded rapidly, overtaken, not surprisingly, by the economy. By December of 2008, over 3/4 of Americans said the top problem facing the country was the economy. Point 5, American satisfaction with the way things are going in the U.S. dropped dramatically during the course of the 8 years of the George W. Bush administration. Back in January of 2001, when Bush took office, 56% of Americans said they were satisfied with the way things were going in the country. That number went up some and then down some in the first year or two of the Bush administration, and then generally was on a downward track. At one point this year, we had only 7% of Americans who were satisfied with the way things were going, the lowest point in Gallup's history. And as 2008 ended in December, just 10% of Americans were satisfied with the way things are going in the U.S. There you have it, 5 key points from the perspective of the American public on George W. Bush's 8 years as President of the United States. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Editor-in-Chief of the Gallup Poll.